Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I'm Chris Provin.
I'm Luke Freeman.
And I am Hannah Braderud. And today we are wrapping up our series on hope. And in fact, hope is wrapping up our entire season on intentional leadership. So this is the final installment in this season. And we're going to talk about hope, but we're going to talk about also a contrast to hope today. But let's just give a brief recall on what hope is. Hope is the belief that the future will be better and that you have the power to make it so. And that requires three things. The first part of that is a better future, right? So we have to have a goal, a clear goal for a better future. The second part of that is how we get to that future. So it requires pathways. Pathways are realistic plans or a course of action for how we're going to achieve those goals. And then the third element is agency. That's the belief part, right? The believing that you can make choices to follow the pathway and achieve the goal, and that you have the resources to do it. So there's an element of not only willpower, but the belief that we have what we need to meet our goals. I want to remind everyone that there is the free guide available on our website that will help you develop hope for yourself and for your teams. To get that guide, go to magicintheroom.com. And in this episode, we're going to be reflecting on some of these elements of hope, but we're also going to be introducing the contrast, which is nihilism. So, Luke, what is nihilism?
Yeah, we're just going to jump right into this. Jump into the darkness, stare into the void. And to me, before I say what is nihilism, I'm going to preface this before we just jump head first down into this void. Like, to me, this is important to understand because when we get to the end of this conversation, my hope is that people are going to understand that we have to be champions of hope, because there are a lot of troubling trends in the lack of hope around the people around us, specifically young folks. So that's what I want to share about. And the best word that I have come up with, or the best concept to capture kind of the zeitgeist of what's happening, especially with our younger workers and people that we have influence over, is nihilism. Now, there's some skepticism of nihilism, that it's a little bit too general and that it actually is lots of different types of philosophies or worldviews. But I think for the purposes of our conversation and contrasting it to hope, it's a helpful word. So nihilism basically is a rejection of fundamental aspects of human existence. Nihilism is the rejection of moral principles, and at its core, the belief that life does not hold meaning. So there are some related pieces of this, kind of some flavors and colors to it. One is this belief that there's nothing to approve of in established social order, so that everything that's happening is a construct and kind of these causes and effects that have no meaning at their core or no moral value one way or the other. And it's also closely related to cynicism, which we've talked about in previous episode on hope. And cynicism really just questions the motives of people and policies. And so nihilism would say that no one has pure motives, and that no moral principle has meaning. And the reason I think it's relevant is I believe that a lot of our young people are embracing nihilism. I don't know that it's their fault, that it's an active choice to embrace this worldview that nothing has meaning. But because of a lot of things going on, like I think nihilism it's real and it's a growing reality in the American young workforce.
I think it's also related to cynicism, right? Which we have talked about a little bit before as well. It's really about questioning motives and of people and policies, or just feeling that nothing matters. And but it feels to me that nihilism is even darker. Like we've gone further into the void or deeper into the abyss. And I do think it's really, yeah, we look around in the world today and there's definitely there's a lot of darkness. And I think a lot of people are experiencing that very directly. And I do think there are reasons why a lot of younger people especially feel hopeless and feel like maybe there isn't anything to believe in. There is no meaning, because how can I even make a difference when there's so much darkness and so much suffering and so much pain and so many things that seem to be going wrong or headed in the wrong direction in society.
Yeah, I mean, we've got obviously, technical interruption with advent of smartphones and 24/7 connectivity. We've got breakdowns in our ability to govern ourselves. I think the effect of governments has certainly been in decline. The fabric of families continues to be challenged, especially, still adjusting to, if there are two parents in the home, how many jobs are there in the home? It's more difficult to get by on two now more than ever. So you got a lot of 3 and even 4 job homes in single parent situations. Certainly, the majority will have 1 and 2 jobs in order to try to carry a home. So what does that do to the social fabric? And I think there's a lot of ways that we create doubt, or that we can observe reasons to be doubtful about the meaning that we have here. And, but someone has to believe differently. And I think that's the call and the charge to leaders, is to remain hopeful even when things are trending the other way around us. Because someone has to model the behavior for other people to follow. And if it's possible one time, then it can be possible 1,000 times. And if you can get thousands of people modeling the concern for others and the behaviors that create thriving communities, then that's the path. But we got to be willing to take the hill. Like, being a passive leader, I believe now more than ever, like, it's not helpful. Like, being a leader that will take a stand and activate belief and go live in a way that's aligned with what we believe, it's that bravery and that's that courage, and that's how you change these things. One home, one neighborhood, one town, one city.
You really nailed it with that for me. I mean, this feeling of responsibility to make a positive difference. And I think part of the reason that I feel personally responsible to speak for hope is that I see a lot of leaders having this instinct, and I have it myself from time to time, to blame people who aren't acting with hope. If we see someone who doesn't care if they show up late or if they do a good job, and they're like, "Oh, it doesn't matter anyway," right? And we sense that, whether they say it or not, that they really don't believe that the way they show up in the workplace matters. We're really tempted to say, "Oh gosh, kids these days. Oh gosh, what is it with these young workers? Like, why are they acting this way? They don't even want to work. They just want to drive Uber, right? I hear people say these things a lot. And for a long time, it really bothered me. Instinctually, I was like, that can't be right. Like, these are good kids. These folks have potential. Like, why can't we cut them a break? Um, and so really digging into it, I was like, I think there are some real things that are driving this behavior. So Chris, I just want to like paint a little bit of a picture for the story that you painted there about like what's happening economically that drives a lack of hope and some of these behaviors. So let's look at difference in household income, right? It's grown on average. Our household income is 30% higher than it was in 1960, but the average rent is about 75% higher. So average household income, 30%, average rent, 75% higher. Average home price, 120% higher than it was in 1960. So while our revenue has grown as families 30%, the price of homeownership has grown 120%. I mean, that's a hope killer. And I'm just going to keep stacking on this. Looking at number of school shootings, similar time period, 1970 to 2022, right? In 1970, nationwide, we had about 20, and that number held stable, came up a little bit in the mid 90s, stayed less than 50 a year, all the way till 2006. In 2006, the number of school shootings in the US rose over 50, and then it hovered above and below 50 until about 2018. In 2018, it rose over 50 again. In 2019, it rose above 100. And in 2021, we had almost 250 school shootings. Now, part of that is due to COVID and effects of COVID. I think people pretty much agree about that as researchers. But even in 2022, when it did drop back down, it dropped down to 150. So, and we see that on the news, right? Our kids are growing up in spaces that are different than what the older generations grew up in. I'm just going to do one more on here for you. Religious affiliation. Okay. So number of folks who have no religious affiliation goes from a little bit less than 20% of older generations, somewhere between 20%. When you get to boomers, it's 25%. Folks who have no religious affiliation at all. For Gen Z, we're up to 45%. So almost half the population has no religious affiliation when you get down to Gen Z. And, I'm not going to say what religious affiliation, I think is most helpful for people, but there's a story here when we look at lack of economic hope, lack of physical safety, and then also lack of sort of moral scaffolding that has played a role in a lot of people's lives for a long time. So I just kind of hit all that to you guys. I'm curious, what's your response? Like, they're heavy numbers, they're hard. I said we were going to dive headfirst into darkness here, right? But like, thoughts, how's that strike you?
My reaction is that, yeah, it feels dark. And if I spend too much time dwelling on those statistics, like, it's dark, and part of me wants to just like avert my eyes and not look at it and not pay attention and pretend like it's not happening, right? Also, what's true is I do know for part of what's driving this too is that we have access to so much information, and we have such just wealth of information streaming at us at all angles. We see it on the news, what's going on in the world, all over the internet. And then with the advent of social media, all of these trends have just accelerated, right? Because we have a constant barrage of all of this, right? So for me, it's partly, it's two things. Like, I have to be informed and be aware, right? Because the first step of intentional leadership is to notice, right? And notice something that could be better. So be aware of what's going on in the world, but also be aware of how it affects me, how it impacts me as a leader, and what is my ability to stay hopeful, right? And then, so for me, that means I do have to make choices about how much negative news and negativity that I consume, right? So yeah, do I sometimes create a little bubble around myself to insulate myself from all of the negativity and all the bad news? Absolutely, I do. I'm careful about what I consume and how much time I spend, while still knowing that there are things that I can do, right? So recognizing what are the things that I have influence over and that I can be hopeful about, right? And just to some extent, literally shielding myself from some of the negativity so that I can choose to stay hopeful and have agency in the areas where I can make a difference.
And what I would call out is, just a lack of moral authority and a lack of, we talked about this earlier this week, this belief or this feeling of, like, I know what I believe, but what is that anchored to? What is the basis on which my morals are built? And if I cannot identify the foundation upon which my beliefs are built, how are they not waverly? Or how can they be sound? And there's just less defined authority on which our moral principles are founded. And I don't know how much of it has to do with, hard times produce effective leaders and people that get things done, and easy times produce people that don't, or have a more difficult time. And yes, the world is more difficult, but how much of that is a result of things actually being easier? 24/7 connectivity, most people having a roof over their head, unemployment at less than 4%. It's a very different time today than 1776 or 1492.
Yeah, and I think there's two layers to this lack of moral authority that you're talking about. One is, let me just back up what you were saying with some statistics. People don't believe that institutions have authority, right? So when we look at average confidence in major U.S. institutions, this is a poll that Gallup has kept track of for a long time. In 1979, about 50% of folks had confidence in major U.S. institutions. This last year, it was at 26%. So our confidence in U.S. institutions has halved over that time. Now, the good news of that, if you dig into the data, is that small business actually has the highest confidence from the public. They believe that small businesses have a role to play. So if you're a listener and you're in small business, you maybe have a bit more moral authority, as Chris said, than others. But large business, public institutions, government, universities, U.S. Congress in particular. U.S. Congress, by the way, is the lowest rated in confidence, which, hey, they earn it. But we don't get moral authority just by being a boss, is what I'm trying to say. Like no young person comes into our organization and says, well, they're right. They have insight because of the role they're in. If you see our hierarchy as a construct that is meaningless, you're much less likely to automatically, when they say jump, you ask how high. So we are working with that. On the flip side, I think what you're saying, Chris, and this is the other layer of moral authority, it is a different game to build our own moral fabric than to take the moral scaffolding provided by someone else. And the kids that we're working with are working through this process of saying, what is it that I believe? What are the rules that are going to govern my life? And without saying, well, I'm just going to adopt the scaffolding that you're telling me are the moral rules, like there's a level of emotional energy that they're putting forth that, one, we need to understand, but two, I'm not going to say we can take advantage of it in a manipulative way, but we can fill the void if we're a leader that's not afraid to talk about what we believe and why we believe what we believe. So I'll say one thing that has started becoming a habit for me is talking about, what do I believe? I believe in kindness. And there's a lot of things in the world that I might be wrong about. I might have an opinion about how we do something, or what the right order of a project is, or what the priority is that we need to get done on a particular day. And I could be wrong about all of that. But one thing I'm going to hang my hat on is that kindness is never a bad decision. And like that has been resonating, but I have to have the courage to say it. I have to have the courage to own that myself if I'm going to expect that moral authority to resonate with the people I'm working with.
Well, going from there, how do you create an economy out of it? Right? And that's not just believing in kindness and valuing that, but how do you expand the reach of that and the impact of kindness by activating it as an entrepreneur, as a community leader, as someone that has connectivity, a network, and influence? How do you go about that?
Yeah, I'm going to turn that back on you two. How do we go about that? I mean, it's a different type of power. Yeah. It's referent power. Right. If you want to be nerdy, right? We have a whole episode on types of power that you can listen back to, but we can't get our power just by our position.
Right. You can make the choice to go live it. Like, you know, do I have proper orientation to the thing that I value? Do I have proper daily orientation to kindness, daily orientation to love, care, and respect, daily orientation to the first things or the big rocks, so that I don't get hung up in doing unimportant work that's only urgent, that isn't activating any kind of belief. And the challenge is there's a lot of people that are compensated to comply with orders and transact in order to get something done. A lot of jobs are not compensated to make things happen. And this is the call to leaders, and actively believing in your own moral compass, actively establishing an economy around your values, and going out and doing the things like draw the sword, take the hill. Like, are we willing to do that? Otherwise, we're just passively watching everything erode around us.
Yeah, exactly. Luke, you gave kind of a clue here, right, about filling the void, because I think that's exactly what is driving a lot of this for people, that sense of emptiness, of a void. When there's nothing to believe in, what is there? Right? And, you know, a couple of things that I've been reading lately, I think really make that, just illustrates that, right? And I happened to, so I'd started reading Lost Connections by Johann Hari, which is about the origins of, or really the causes and cure, antidote for depression and anxiety, right? And this understanding of revelation that depression is not primarily caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. It is primarily caused by the loss of human connection and the void of meaningful human connection. And I'd started reading that book, and then when the news broke that Matthew Perry passed away, I discovered that he had written a book that came out just a year before. And I wasn't aware of the book until that event, right? And so I read his autobiography, and the biggest theme throughout the entire book is that sense of void that he was always trying to fill, right? I mean, he achieved the height of wealth and fame and all the material things that anyone could possibly ever want, and constantly felt that sense of void, of something missing, of not being enough, of, right? And he talks through his journey of discovering and making some of those discoveries, and yet addiction had taken such a hold on him that he wasn't able to really shake that, right? But what was driving the addiction, just like what is driving depression and anxiety, is the sense of loss of something meaningful to believe in, which is really what nihilism at its core is, right? And so, yeah, how do we economize that? How do we create an antidote for that? How do we create a different system? I don't know. Those are big questions, but I believe it starts with hope, which we can teach, right? What is the alternative? What could a better future look like? Can we help people see the light? Can we help people see that there is a possibility for a better future? Can they get behind, get excited about maybe a different way of living, a different way of being? Can we show the path? Can we show those pathways to how to reach that goal? And can we help instill agency into people? I think those are the questions for intentional leaders to figure out, like, how do we do that for ourselves?
Yeah. And I mean, we talk about this all the time. I mean, I think it does come back to, if we can be leaders who have depth, who are reflective, who understand what we believe, and who have language around the shared purpose of an organization, it can be something that helps fill that void. And I think this is where we have daylight between us and some other business leaders, in that there are a lot of folks who would say, not my problem, not the role of my company. I'm not here to provide meaning and fulfillment and hope for the folks that work on my team. And I think, one, I have whatever, a moral belief that if I do have influence, I also have responsibility. But also, I mean, just purely going back to the word economy, like the economy of purpose and hope, I also believe this is an amazing opportunity for organizations that aren't afraid to get clear on what they believe. And if people are looking for community and connection, and we say, you want that? We have that here. That is part of our jam. That is something that we understand, that we know about. We're not afraid of having those conversations. Our leaders here are not afraid to call you if you have a family member die. Our leaders here are not afraid to talk to you about what career choice you might make that doesn't include our company. Like, no one's afraid of that. We're here to do something else, and something that's bigger. And every company has to determine exactly what words they're going to use for that. But I do believe there's a huge opportunity, but it does start with personal responsibility. And, I'll go back to the leaders who say, what's the deal with kids these days? I'm going to share one last. I mean, we're coming up for air, Hannah. I hear you saying, like, let's come up for air and provide hope. But, like, I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit. Share a stat with you. This is the worst one, right? So, suicide and self-harm. So, and this one only looks back 20 years. So 20 years ago in 2001, the share out of 1,000 people who were admitted to the emergency room, 2 of them were teenage girls who were admitted for self-harm. So out of 1,000, emergency room admittances. 2 of them were teenage girls admitted for self-harm. And right now, last stats we have is 2020, 7 out of 1,000 is a teenage girl who's admitted for self-harm. And suicide has gone up at a similar rate. And like, to me, to hear what's wrong with kids these days, they need to figure it out. How do I find the good ones? This isn't 100% true. I get that. Like, what I'm saying is maybe more dramatic and inflammatory as it should be. But what I hear those leaders say is like, that's their fault. It's those teenage girls' fault that there's 7 out of 1,000 now instead of 2 out of 1,000. And sure, everyone has some personal choice in the matter, but this is our society and culture's responsibility as much as it is the individuals. The world that we have created together is a pretty rough place. And I think we all have a role in fixing it. And if I'm supervising one person or 10 people or 10,000 people, like, I have responsibility to make them not one of the 7 as much as within my power. And I think that means something.
What you touch on there, Luke, is this idea of, the social contract. Like, do we believe in the social contract that exists between 2 people that says, I am responsible for your well-being? Now, certainly as a leader, that cool joke of like, we don't realize we signed that contract. But as leaders, we do take responsibility for the well-being of our team, for the well-being of the careers that we're charged with developing, for the well-being of the competencies, or for the development of the competencies within the people that we support and that then provide them with opportunity. So we see a lot of evidence of leadership and highly effective leaders being really great stewards and openly accepting the social responsibility to be not pro-life in terms of abortion, but being pro-life once we're here and taking care of the people around me so that the community that I'm a part of or the family that I'm a part of can be a more fulfilling and meaningful place to be.
Yeah. So let's get practical. We have talked about hope over this last month. We know, as Hannah reminded us, that it has 3 components. We have to have a goal, a clear vision of a better future. We have to have pathways that are realistic. And we have to believe that we have the power, we have agency to move forward. So let's talk about, as leaders who are working particularly with folks who might be experiencing worldview, thoughts, feelings of nihilism, what are some things that we can help them do? So I'll kick it off with an idea, and then I'd love to hear you all's thoughts. And I'm just going to get super practical here. I love the practice of helping people start to believe that they have power in their world. Yes, the world is scary. Yes, it's dark. Yes, we're completely overwhelmed with bad news. And your life, the things closest to you, the more power you feel over those, the more hope is going to be created. So anytime that we can get really small and say, well, like, what's something you want to do next week? How could you work towards that? And then celebrate it big whenever they accomplish it. Like, that is a small way to practice agency. That could be, hey, you have ownership over this supply closet. Please organize it. Let me check it out next week. Or it could be something big. Hey, we have a big project coming up. I'd love you to take point. I'm going to give you feedback after every stakeholder meeting, and just make sure that we are constantly building up and adding their personal agency and power in those settings. So that's mine. That's my first tip trick.
Yeah, I think personal power is so key to all of this, right? And personal power is really another way to say agency, that belief that we can make a difference and make an impact. I think another really practical thing that leaders and organizations can do is ask for feedback and then loop back and tell people what you heard and what you did about the feedback, right? So this is one of the things that we teach organizations to do. If you want people to feel like they have a voice in your organization, that they have organizational participation, which is one of the things that impacts the team member experience, that really has a huge impact on engagement, right? And it has impact on engagement because it increases of agency. If I say something, I will be heard and I will be taken seriously, and my ideas count, right? So if we ask for feedback, and we often do that through surveys and other formal mechanisms, but if I never hear anything back about that feedback, and I remember earlier in my career, I was asked to fill out surveys all the time, right? And I felt like at first I was very diligent about the surveys, and I provided very detailed and specific feedback. And I never heard any, I felt like it went into a void. There's that word again. It just went into the void, into a black hole, and I never knew what happened to it. And I gradually started providing less feedback, and then I just started ignoring the surveys, right? Because I was like, it doesn't matter. I worked in a very large organization. I was like, what does it matter if I say anything on the survey, right? So if we do, as a practice, when we have team meetings or all hand meetings or town hall meetings, whatever we call them, right? We do that practice of, you said we did. This is what we heard from you in our survey. These are some high level takeaways and some themes that we heard. And here's something we're going to do about it right now. Here's some things that we can and are doing something about. Here's some things that maybe we want to look at changing in the future. And maybe we'll put some plans into place to make some of these things better, or change them or optimize them. And maybe here are some things we heard that we can't really do anything about right now, and this is why, right? But that loop back of giving people the why and providing them the reason, while letting them know that they were heard, I think that's another practical way of just instilling a little bit more agency and hope.
How about you, Chris? Any tips or tricks on how we can start pushing back against nihilism?
Model the way, right? Like, Kuzis and Posner, man. Like, model the way. Be courageous enough to live out the values that you hold most dear, and be courageous enough not to sacrifice those. And especially, let's not sacrifice those for the right to transact within an organization and do work that's not fulfilling. I mean, when we speak and live our values, the worst thing that can happen is we leave an organization we're misaligned with and go have a similar role or a better role or a more developed role in an organization that is aligned with what we believe. So I'm going to encourage people to really assess whether they are value aligned with the organization that they're a part of, and actively move towards organizations that allow you to live and activate your values on a daily basis.
I'm going to just add to that a little bit. This will be my last word on tip and trick here, is acknowledge the darkness. Our young team members are seeing this world, and a lot of them have grown up their formative years in a world that feels really chaotic. And as you said, Hannah, just an overwhelm of negative information. And when something bad happens, when a war breaks out, when we see pain and destruction, when we see failure of our elected officials, when we make a mistake, not being afraid to say, oh my gosh, this is really hard. This is a big deal. Is everyone okay? I mean, we're recording this on the week that physical altercations broke out in the halls and on the floor of Congress. And it's totally normal for people to be like, is our government functioning? I feel anxiety because am I going to trust these clowns to keep us out of a shutdown or to make wise decisions? Young people are smart. They see that and they feel that anxiety. Is it okay for us as a leader to be like, wow, are you guys okay? Like, how do we think this is going to go? Like, what does this mean for us as a team? Right. And that's a silly one, right? I mean, silly as in laughing into the void. If you think about it, scary, but we should be able to acknowledge the realities of our world and provide hope. And I don't see that as those are not conflicting approaches. Those are the same approach, to acknowledge the reality and offer hope. So if we don't do that, we're just letting the reality sit there without a response.
Yeah. And so what we can't give to people, we can't teach passion. We can't teach ethical intensity, right? That's an individual decision to go be those things and allow them to be socially learned by those around us.
Mm-hmm.
So for those that are active in what we believe and want to see change for the better and start movements, words just aren't that helpful, because these are behaviors that are learned socially. And as we act them, then we get people rallying around us and we start to forge teams around these ideas of actively caring, actively actioning, actively respecting, actively looking for ways to be better. And then that gives us all the permission to be discontented, to be a little bit pissed off about where we are today. And it gives us power to go make tomorrow better. Maybe I can't do that for the whole world, maybe not my whole state, but maybe for my neighborhood, certainly under my roof, within the team that I lead or within the business that I'm in. So like, don't be so upset that, oh, if only I had a different position, I could lead. Oh, we learn how to lead where we are. That's the beauty of it. That's high performance. When you learn how to activate your values from exactly where you are without a need to say, well, if only I was here, if only I was there, if only I didn't work for this person, or if only, I had a different situation. Just do it.
Yeah. And I think that's what I'm hearing. There's an element there too, Chris, in choosing to not be a victim to our circumstances, right? Again, that's a choice. We can notice when that is happening. We can choose a different response, and then we can take some action to make positive change. And you mentioned neighborhood. I live in a small community, right? A mountain town that is changing very quickly. And the larger, community of Big Sky and Bozeman and this part of Montana is experiencing so much rapid change. And it's change is painful, right? The change that we don't choose is really painful. It's really uncomfortable. And I see a lot of people feeling really hopeless about the situation. Many are getting angry about it. There's a lot of negativity on social media and just in conversation overheard in the community, right? Of the change and people choosing to leave. Others choose to stay, but be angry about it, right? And so for me, the only choice, because I still choose to be here, and I can choose to stay and connect with my values, connect with my purpose, and find a way to help others recognize that there is hope, right? And so if I'm going to stay in a community or in a situation, and by the way, I read this quote the other day that whatever you are not changing, you are choosing, right? So if we're not choosing to make change, we are choosing the current situation. So we can, we can stay, we can choose to stay, and we can choose to make a positive impact. So, the things that we've been talking about so far, how do we help people create meaningful connection to other human beings, to their work, to nature, to the things that help us experience meaning in our lives and our communities. So that's some of my reflections and final thoughts as I've been thinking about our conversation here.
Yeah. Well, this is hard stuff. And I'm grateful for listeners to come along with us. I think for better or worse, this is the hard work that just a few leaders do. It's not something that everyone does. And I invite you, if you're listening, just to dive into it. How do you get so clear on what you believe and your shared purpose and what you believe to be true about your role as a leader, that you can be that effective modeler of hope and someone who invites people into hope in their lives? We need it, and we need you. If you need coaching, if you just want to talk about it, reach out to us. The guide for hope with the formula for building hope is at magicintheroom.com. As a reminder, this is our last topic in the month on hope. And it's also the last topic on our year-long series on intentional leadership. So we'll have a wrap-up episode coming out. And just really encourage people to reach out to us. Hannah, how can people find us?
Yeah, you can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com. We're on LinkedIn, on Facebook, and on Instagram if you want to follow us on social media. And Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Provins, Hannah Broderud, and Luke Freeman. It is produced by Ben West. Social media management is by Emma Holland and Maggie King Robinson. Our theme music is by Evan Grimm. You can find his music on Apple Music. This episode was recorded online. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. Find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and you can find previous episodes at magicintheroom.com.